Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. Today I am picking back up on a really old series, one of the first series that we ever started on our channel, but on the bright side I have slightly better camera, slightly better editing software than I used to. That being said, welcome back to the Entheogens series, which was one of the first series we ever put out, and which is a huge passion project of mine. I am not a master of many things, in my personal opinion. I try to be a master of myself and often fail. But I do consider myself to be a master herbalist, which took me my lifetime. I've been studying for 30 years now. I'm not exaggerating. I started my herbal apprenticeship when I was 6 years old, and I'm 36 now. So yeah, 30 years. I consider myself a master herbalist, and my passion is poisons and entheogens. That's my favorite thing to learn about. It's what I love. That being said, I am the wrong person to be teaching this class. This is an in-depth look at an entheogen, peyote, and I am not from the cultures that makes use of it. I'm not. I'm really not. So there's a couple things I want to stress first. 1, take absolutely everything that I'm about to say with a massive grain of salt. Whenever possible, learn directly from the source cultures. So if you want to learn more about peyote, go and learn from those cultures, not from some random lady on YouTube. 2, only make use of this plant under the guidance of the First Nations people to whom it belongs, and while paying them for the privilege. Please do not take the information provided and go, oh, well, that means that I can go harvest peyote, which is increasingly endangered, and make use of it myself. No, do not do that. I'm not okay with that. And not only, so legality and ethics, that's tricky, right? Because I believe in ethics over legality. I am saying that that would be morally and ethically wrong. However, it's also illegal, so don't do it. If that's what it takes, I'll point out that it is also legally wrong. But no, I would consider it abhorrent, morally repulsive and repugnant to go make use of this plant sans the guidance from the source culture, sans respect for them. And one of the reasons why I'm even going ahead and teaching this class is to draw attention to the fact that this is a First Nations sacrament that First Nations people are being denied access to. And that there are actually many sacraments that they are being denied access to. We're going to get more into that when I talk about the history of its religious use and what the United States government has done, which is, again, I'm going to stress, morally repugnant, but on a whole nother level of morally repugnant. So I want to really talk about entheogen use and the way the United States government has in particular cracked down on First Nations people and taken away something that belongs to them, you know, like everything else, their land, their languages, I could go on. Colonizer abusers, you know, no clean water for you, no, you know, access to your sacred sites for you, no using your sacred plants for you. They take and take and take and take. Like I said, I don't belong to this culture. So really, if you want to understand what it is like for them, go talk to them, please. I'm begging you. And I mean, you go like, oh, well, how? I will go into how I went and did peyote under the guidance of a First Nations person in a legal ceremony, because yes, it was legal for me to do so, but more so, I went and paid the person that belongs to the culture. So that's how you should do this. You should go talk to them. All right, I've belabored that point. There is one last thing that I want to say, which is that I'm sorry, this video is going to be really, really, really long. And I actually have the booklet that goes with it. Like it's all written and edited and everything, but I don't feel comfortable charging for it because, again, this is not my culture. So if you want access to the notes, this is not one of the ones where you have to become a patron to get them. Just shoot us a message and we will send you the PDF for free. Because it's not my culture. I'm not charging. I'm not going to benefit financially from something that doesn't belong to me. All right. This video is going to be really, really long. So I'm sorry. I may end up splitting it into 2 parts, in which case I will have to put this little mini rant at the beginning of both, but we will see. And I apologize that there's going to be just a lot of me talking. So what is. All right, let's get into it. Entheogens have played a pivotal role in the spiritual practices of most cultures for millennia. An entheogen is a chemical substance, typically of plant origin, that is ingested in order to produce a non-ordinary state of consciousness for religious or spiritual purposes. The first American entheogen to be subject to scientific analysis was the peyote cactus, Lophophora williamsi. Peyote is one of the most ancient known entheogens in the world. Peyote and religious discrimination. Peyote is listed by the United States DEA as a Schedule I controlled substance. However, practitioners of the Peyote Way Church of God, a church of the Native American religions, perceived the regulations regarding the use of peyote as discriminatory, leading to religious discrimination issues regarding the U.S. policy towards drugs. As a result of the court case, Peyote Way Church of God versus Thornburg, the American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978 was passed. This federal statute allows the traditional Indian religious use of the peyote sacrament, exempting only use by Native American persons. Other jurisdictions have similar statutory exemptions in reaction to the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Employment Division versus Smith, 494 U.S. 872 in 1990, which held that laws prohibiting the use of peyote that do not specifically exempt religious use nevertheless do not violate the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment. In other words, a blanket ban on peyote use, despite its use as a religious sacrament, was considered constitutional, requiring specific legislative exemptions to be created. Scientific name: Lophophora williamsi. Common names. Please note that some of these are from languages that I do not speak. So pay more attention to the text on the screen than my rather horrid pronunciation. I've done my best. In many cases, I've tried to look up and repeat what I'm hearing from pronunciation guides online. But again, those pronunciation guides may not be correct. So take it with a grain of salt. Peyote, peyotel, peyotl, buttons, mescalito. Other names which are often considered variations in spelling and pronunciation of the basic word peyote and peyotl include peyote, pelote, peyote, peori, peyot, pezot, and peyotl. At this point, I'm going to divert and do a brief, tiny little rant on exonyms versus endonyms. It is very common for a culture that has in some way been marginalized, oppressed, conquered, invaded, to be described by those other forces using an exonym rather than an endonym. An exonym is something that is used to describe a people that is not what they call themselves, and an endonym is what they call themselves. Whenever possible, it is important to use an endonym and not an exonym. Unfortunately, I don't know all of the endonyms for First Nations peoples. I tried to find them when I could. I went to tribal websites and looked to see if there was something where they call themselves. I looked through historical documents. There's a lot of Googling. And even more than that, I oftentimes don't know how to pronounce the endonym because I've never heard it said, and I couldn't find a pronunciation guide online. So again, pay more attention to the text than to what I am saying here, because it may not be correct. Take my pronunciation with several massive grains of salt. Additionally, throughout this class, a lot of times the legal term for First Nations individuals of North and South America is Indian, and that's not correct. They're not Indians, they're not from India. That is an exonym. They are the First Nations, Indigenous, Native Americans. Any of those terms is generally considered respectful and is what I would prefer to use, but when I'm using it in a legal context, like citing a court case or a law, I will go ahead and use the exonym. I'm not thrilled with it, but what is. Okay, I think that's everything I wanted to say. So let's get into it. Lastly, one more little tiny rant, and I'm so sorry about this. America is huge. North America and South America are continents. And one of the things that drives me up the wall when reading through historical documentations is it will say, like, the natives of North America do this thing. And I'm like, which ones? Holy fuck, do you have any idea how many peoples there were here? It was a fully populated continent. There were nations and kingdoms that were fully established. There are, oh my gosh, it's not like the continent was empty when the colonizers got here. And I mean, like, taking into account that sometimes they'll actually say, like, the Indians of the Americas, and it's like, excuse me, I'm not one of the, people born in the United States that goes, oh, America just means North America, like as in the United States, right? America, fuck yeah. No. There is all of North America and all of South America is included in the term the Americas, not just the United States. So when we use that kind of huge ambiguous phrase, that's a lot of territory. That's a lot of land. There were a lot of people, and spanning, all of these many, many hundreds and thousands of years. And I want to, like, go around and smack historians with, like, a stack of my notes going, who, what, when, where, why. Who, what, when, where, why. So just know that when this does refer very ambiguously to First Nations people, I tried to find that information. If you have that information, please give it to me so that I can correct my notes and that this is something that really, really bothers me too. All right, that's it. Thanks. The many peoples of the First Nations who use peyote have words for the plant in their own language. However, many also use the term peyote fairly interchangeably as well. Many, not all. Some of these peoples and their common names for peyote follow. Again, my pronunciation is probably off. The Nemuna, which means the people, called by the exonym Comanche, Wakowi, Wahoki. The Koras, also called by the exonym Nayaritas or Nayares, Huatari. The Lenni Lenape, also called by the exonym the Delaware, the Eastern Delaware, or the Cherokee Delaware. Baisong. The Wixaritari, also called by the exonym Huchol. Hikori, Hikuli, Hikori, Yikori, Yishori. The Kikapoa or Kikapoi, also called by the exonym Kickapoo. Peyote, a naturalization of the term peyote in their language. The Ka-Igwu or the Gao-Igwu, also called by the exonym Kiowa, call it Seni. The Shishinde or Meshkalende or Meshkalene or Meshkalode, also called by the exonym Mescalero, call it Ho. The Inde or Dine, also called by the exonym Apache, call it Ho. The Dine or Nabio, also called by the exonym Navajo, call it Azi. The Mo'on Ho'on, also called by the exonym Omaha, call it Macan. The Udive or the Deve, the Ore, Teguma, Tehuma, and the Ova or Jowa, also called by the exonym Opata, call it Peyote. The Nuhu or Nuhmu, also called by the exonym Atomi, call it Bayo. The Tainan or Ia Tainan, also called by the exonym Taus, call it Walena. The Rara Muri, also called by the exonym Tara Humara, primarily call it Hikuli, but also Hikori, Hikoli, Yikori, Yikoli, Ho'uaname, Hikuli Waname, Hikuli Walula, Salayame, and Yutori. The Dami, also called by the exonym Tepuhuane, call it Kambe or Kambata. The Kitti-Kitti-ish or the Kiri-Kiri-ish, also called by the exonym Wichita, call it Nazats. The Ho-Chunk or Ho-Chungra, called by the exonym Winnebago, call it Hunk. The names applied to peyote by drug users in the United States in the late 1970s included, but were not limited to, devil's root, diabolic root, dry whiskey, dumpling cactus, the really offensive Indian dope, moon, the bad seed, pea, rayas diabolica, the devil's root, tuana de tierra, earth cactus, turnip cactus, and white mule. The study of peyote has frequently been confused because the plant has received so many different names. Bernardino de Sahagún first described the plant in Western sources in 1560 CE, when he referred to the root peyotl by the Chimichimeca of Mexico. The two most commonly used names, peyote and peyotl, are modifications of that ancient word. The actual source and meaning of the word peyotl is disputed, and at least 3 theories have proposed to explain its etymologies. Several European colonizers have suggested that the term peyote came from the Aztec word pepeyoni or pepeyon, which means to excite. A derived word from this is peyonanique, meaning to stimulate or to activate. A similar proposal was made by V.A. Recco and extensively discussed by Richard Evan Schultz. They suggested that the term peyote came from a different Aztec word, piyutli, meaning a small plant with narcotic action. This is a somewhat narrow interpretation of the action of peyote and would likely better be translated as medicinal rather than narcotic, as the natives used the plant in both contexts. Probably the most widely accepted etymological explanation for the origin of the term peyote was suggested by A. D. Molina, who claimed that it comes from the Nahuatl word peyotl, which means in his words, capullo de seda o de gusano. Translated from Spanish, this means silk cocoon or caterpillar's cocoon, Molina's explanation therefore proposed that the original word was applied to the plant because of its appearance rather than its physiological action. Certainly, one of the most distinctive characteristics of peyote is the numerous tufts of white wool or hair-like fibers. Dried plant material has even great proportion of the silky material, and most of it must be plucked prior to making use of the cactus. The presence of these woolly hairs may be of significance to the etymology because some other pubescent, hairy or woolly, that's literally what that means. I know that some people giggle over it, but that's what it means. Plants, which are not cacti, have occasionally been called peyote by the natives in the area where it grows. Examples of such non-cacti being called by the word peyote include the cotyledon Caespitosa of the family Crassulaceae and Cacalia cordifolia and Senecio hartwegi of the family Compositae. These plants have little in common with the peyote cactus except for their pubescent tufts of silky hairs and the fact that sometimes they have been used medicinally. The Nahuatl name peyote is sometimes said to be derived from a root meaning glisten or glistening. Other sources translate the Nahuatl word as divine messenger. As I am not Nahuatl, I don't know. I'm not. The Mexican word piule, which is generally translated to mean hallucinogenic plant, may have come indirectly down from peyote. R. Gordon Wasson, who studied many hallucinogenic plants and fungi, suggested that peyote or peyotol became peyule, which was further corrupted into piule. Piule is also applied to Rivia corymbosa. The history of peyote. Archaeological investigations in northeast Mexico and Trans-Pecos, Texas, have shown that the use of psychoactive plants in this region date back to approximately 8,500 BCE. The Aboriginal and native inhabitants of the region used the mescal bean, Sophora secundiflora, on buttons from the peyote cactus. From an archaeological site in Coahuila, Mexico, several peyote buttons were retrieved and carbon dated to approximately 835 to 1070 years before the present time. The alkaloid analysis revealed the presence of mescaline and 4 related tetrahydroisoquinoline alkaloids. Yeah, that's a mouthful. Samples of peyote buttons thought to have been found in the Shumla Cave No. 5 on the Rio Grande, Texas, have also been analyzed. Radiocarbon dating showed a mean age of 5,700 years. The samples are now in a collection of the Witte Museum in San Antonio, Texas. Standard alkaloid extraction procedures done on both sets of the samples gave residues that were analyzed by thin layer chromatography, gas chromatography, and mass spectrometry. Mescaline was found in both samples based on identical retention times and RF values and similar mass to charge ratios and fragmentation patterns. The detection of mescaline in 2 different samples of ancient psilocybe buttons, both analyzed by 2 methods based on different principles, is reliable evidence for this kind of use of psychoactive or psychotropic plants. Freshly prepared peyote buttons can contain up to 8% of total alkaloids. The previously studied 1,000-year-old sample had a lower content, between 2 and 5%. The modern analysis of ancient peyote found that alkaloid content had fallen to 2%, and mescaline was the only peyote alkaloid identified in the samples. There was no trace of any of the tetrahydroisoquinoline alkaloids typical for peyote. The studied peyote material is currently the oldest plant drug that yielded a major bioactive compound on chemical analysis. From a cultural point of view, the identification of mescaline strengthens the evidence that First Nation cultures recognized and valued and made use of the psychoactive properties of peyote as long as 5,700 years ago. So to sum up, because that was a lot of scientific jargon, we can study these ancient plant samples and find that they still contain the active components of the plants that are used now. And then we can also study the cultures that still exist to this day and see how they make use of those same plant materials. And we can say, well, right now they seem to value it partially for the fact that it contains mescaline and these other alkaloids. So we can assume that they were gathering it for the same reason in the past. And when we do study them, we can find these ancient samples contain that same active component. And from that, we can draw these conclusions. So it's a combination always of the study of items found at ancient sites and the study of the culture that survives to this day, if the culture survives to the day. Or similar cultures, if that one does not. All right. Timeline of peyote usage. Circa 3700 BCE, Native Americans in the Rio Grande in the Shumla Caves area collected mescaline-containing peyote buttons and manufactured peyote effigy structures. So we can assume from this that it was in some way religious or spiritual in use. 1000 BCE, peyote is used ceremonially by indigenous cultures in Texas and Mexico. Peyote usage at this point is widespread. June 15th, 1521 CE. The use of hallucinogenic mushrooms and peyote is driven underground as use of non-alcohol intoxicants is forbidden by European colonizers and slavers in Mexico. Catholic priests punished the use of entheogens by the native peoples and forced the religious ceremonies to go underground. So there is a long and bloody history of suppression of this plant matter in native use. 1560 CE, Spanish priest Bernardino de Sahagún writes in his Florentine Codex about the use of peyote and hallucinogenic mushrooms by the Aztecs. He estimates that peyote has been in use since at least 300 BCE. 1550 to 1750 CE, determined efforts by Spaniards to stamp out peyote practices amongst native Mexicans. Peyote use is denounced by the European Catholics as an act of witchcraft and superstition due to its use for purposes of detecting thefts, of divining other happenings, and foretelling future events. Its use was equated with cannibalism in some Catholic texts. 1620 CE, peyote use declared illegal by the Spanish Inquisition. Spanish priests burn Aztec herbalists at the stake, and the Inquisition prosecutes peyote possession as far north as Santa Fe and far west as Manila. 1638 CE, the first proper botanical description of peyote is made by Hernandez, the naturalist of Philip II of Spain. 1760 CE, there is some evidence of the use of peyote having spread to the United States. Late 19th century CE, peyote first classified as Echinocactus williamsii in 1845, changed to Anhalonium williamsii in 1872, Mammillaria williamsii in 1891. It was later changed to Lophophora williamsii, which is its current classification. This is one of the issues when reading really old herbal texts, is that sometimes plants have been reclassified. We talked about this in our daylily video, about how it actually used to be classified as one of the lilies and then eventually was moved to Hemerocallidoideae. But it's something to keep in mind if you're reading ancient works, like the Brugmansias were like this. They used to be the tree daturas, and now we know that they're actually an entirely different thing, and they're called Brugmansia. And to keep that in mind when you're reading old works, and it's worth it to look up, you know, what was this called at a particular time. Okay, where was I? 1847 CE, first published image of peyote appears in Curtis Botanical magazine. 1857 CE, one of the earliest mentions of peyote as a drug uses the term whiskey root. Early 1870 CE, peyote use spreads more widely in the United States. 1872 CE, peyote classification changed to Anhalonium williamsii by Voss. 1887 CE, dried peyote buttons are distributed by Park, Davis & Co. 1888 CE, botanist Paul Dennings publishes a report on Lophophora chemistry, leading to further investigations by other botanists. Late 1800 CE, North American natives bring knowledge of peyote to their own peoples after raids on Mexico. Along with another contemporary movement, the ghost dance, peyote use spreads quickly among the natives of North America. Native prophets like Quanah Parker added Christianity to traditional beliefs and formed the basis of peyote ritual practice most commonly performed today by the Native American Church. 1870 to 1920 CE, peyote usage in the Apache begins, causing significant conflict and falls out of favor. 1892 CE, German explorer Lumholtz describes ceremonial peyote use amongst the Wixárikari, the Huichol, and the Wrangmuri, the Tarahumara, and sends samples of the cacti to Harvard for botanical analysis. 1895 CE, peyote classified as Lophophora williamsi. December 1896 CE, 2 early experience reports describing the effects of peyote extract are published in the British Medical Journal. November 23, 1897 CE, mescaline is first isolated and identified by German pharmacologist and chemist Arthur Hefter. 1902 CE, an early article on peyote titled Mescal, A Study of a Divine Plant, is published in Popular Science Monthly. 1918 CE, the Native American Church is formed. James Mooney, a Smithsonian Institute archaeologist who traveled through Oklahoma in 1891 participating in various peyote ceremonies, becomes convinced of the need to unite the natives' legal right to worship with peyote. He called together a meeting of all the great roadmen, a Native American term for an individual who leads peyote ceremonies, likely of Paiute origin, in 1918 CE, where he wrote the charter for and incorporated the Native American Church. 1918 CE, mescaline is first synthesized by Australian chemist Ernst Spath. 1922 CE, an estimated 13,000 to 22,000 ceremonial users of peyote are in the United States. 1927 CE, an extensive study of mescaline's effect in 32 subjects is published. Kurt Behringer's Der Mescalinrausch, sein Geschichte und Erscheinungsweise, The Mescaline High, Its History and Expression. 1930 CE, over a dozen states outlaw possession of peyote, largely as an anti-Native American act that persecuted Native Americans. October 1945 CE, the U.S. Navy Technical Mission reports on mescaline experiments at the Nazi Dachau concentration camp. 1947 CE, the U.S. Navy initiates mescaline studies under the auspices of Project Chatter. 1952 CE, Dr. Humphrey Osmond begins working with hallucinogens at a hospital in Saskatchewan, looking at the similarity between mescalines and the adrenaline molecule. May 6, 1953 CE, at 11 a.m. on May 6, 1953, Aldous Huxley tries mescaline, a dosage of 400 milligrams, for the first time under the supervision of Dr. Humphrey Osmond. During the experience, he commented, "This is how one ought to see, how things really are." 1954 CE, The Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley is published, describing his 1953 experience with mescaline. 1960 CE, Arizona Judge Yale McFate rules that Native Americans are guaranteed access to the peyote sacrament under the First and 14th Amendments. April 2, 1960 CE, Dr. Alexander Shulgin first tries mescaline, a dosage of 350 milligrams. 1967 CE, peyote is banned federally in the United States. October 27, 1970 CE, the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act is passed. Part 2 of this is the Controlled Substance Act, which defines a scheduling system for drugs. It places most of the known hallucinogens, LSD, psilocybin, psilocin, mescaline, peyote, cannabis, and MDA, in Schedule 1. It places cocaine, and injectable methamphetamine in Schedule 2. Other amphetamines and stimulants, including non-injectable methamphetamine, are placed in Schedule 3. 1991 CE, Alexander and Anne Shulgin publish Pikal, documenting over 250 phenethylamines, including MDMA, mescaline, 2CB, 2CT7, 2CT2, and many others. November 8, 2003 to March 31, 2004, Mythic Visions, yarn paintings of a Huchal shaman exhibit takes place. October 28th to 29th, 2010, CE, Pratiques contemporaires des plantes psychotropes, Contemporary Practices with Psychotropic Plants, is published. So let's talk about the history of peyote and the ghost dance. The ghost dance, Kado, Nanasana, was a religious and spiritual movement that incorporated into numerous Native American belief systems, primarily during the late 1800s CE. The name ghost dance is actually the name given to the dance by white colonizers who were frightened by this spiritual practice, saying that it had a ghostly aura around it, and it is itself an exonym and an insulting one at that. According to the teachings of the Northern Paiute spiritual teacher Wovoka, renamed Jack Wilson, the ghost dance would reunite the living with spirits of the dead, bring the spirits to fight on their behalf, make the white genocidal colonists leave, and bring peace, prosperity, and unity to Native American peoples throughout North America. The ghost dance was first practiced by the Nevada Northern Paiute in 1889 CE. The practice swept throughout most of the western United States. As the ghost dance spread from its original source, different tribes synthesized and syncretized selective aspects of the ritual with their own beliefs. The basis for the ghost dance is the circular dance, a traditional dance done by many Native American peoples. The practice of the ghost dance was believed to have contributed to Lakota resistance to forced assimilation and cultural genocide under the Dawes Act. This culminated in the Ghost Dance War, an armed conflict in the United States between the Lakota Sioux and the United States government from 1890 CE to 1891 CE. The Lakota variation on the ghost dance seems to have developed in response to several genocidal atrocities they suffered during this period. It tends toward millenarianism, an invocation that distinguished the Lakota interpretation from Wovoka's original teachings. The Ghost Dance War involved the Wounded Knee Massacre, wherein the 7th Cavalry massacred approximately 300 unarmed Lakota Sioux, primarily women, children, and elders, at Wounded Knee on December 29, 1890 CE. The Ghost Dance War ended when the Sioux leader Kicking Bear surrendered on January 15, 1891 CE. The Caddo still practice the ghost dance to this day. There is some degree of connection between the spread of the ghost dance movement and peyote usage amongst Native Americans in the late 1800s CE. The primary connection appears to be that the knowledge of the use of peyote spread through the same mechanisms and information routes that spread the ghost dance. Secondarily, many of those who participated in the ghost dance participated in the peyote ritualized ceremonies or used peyote in order to enhance the ghost dance. In Peyote Religion, A History, 1987 CE, Omer C. Stewart wrote about the peyote and ghost dance connection. You can look at this in pages 65 through 67. He wrote that the widespread establishment of a so-called Indian schools, which were unfortunately prevalent in the United States during the 1880s and 1890s, brought children from different cultures and tribes of Native American people together, which allowed for cultural exchange and information distribution through new channels. The schools were a form of cultural genocide and actual genocide, as well as child enslavement. They involved forced conversion to Christianity and white culture. Physical, emotional, and sexual abuse was common, as was sex trafficking and enslavement. Potentially, the only positive thing to come from their existence was the chance for the cultural syncretization of some of these tribes. I say this as if there really could be anything positive about what the colonizers did with these schools, which is one of the greatest atrocities the United States government has committed. And I'm saying that as if we don't just commit atrocities daily. And we do, as a country. We commit atrocities daily. We have so much blood on our hands from these schools. Anyway, Wovoka was unable to travel, and so the ghost dance disseminated through other means. That included through the parents of the children who were stolen for these schools, as well as to others who incorporated increasingly violent elements due to their rage from their mistreatment at the hands of the white colonists. Wovoka's version of the ghost dance was largely overwhelmed by the visions of others, notably Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull. Some peyotists, like Kuana Parker, disavowed the increasingly violent imagery of the ghost dance. Other peyotists experimented with the ghost dance, bringing more Native Americans in contact with the peyote religion. Caddo John Wilson, Pawnee Frank White, and the Rapaho Sitting Bull were ghost dance leaders and peyote roadmen during the period of major dance activity. When the ghost dance faded after a few years and several bloody massacres, the peyote road continued. It is important to note, however, that Mooney's Ghost Dance, Religion and Sioux Outbreak of 1890 CE monograph, written as an ethnologist and anthropologist observing the ghost dancers at the time, makes no mention of peyote as being, it makes no mention of peyote at all. Robert Fuller, author of Stairways to Heaven, Drugs in American Religious History, said, the peyote cult flowed easily along the new channels of intertribal friendship the ghost dance religion had opened up. He also wrote, peyote rituals inherited a great deal of the cultural dynamic underlying the earlier ghost dance movement. That is, like the ghost dance, peyotism was also an attempt to overcome existing social disorganization by means of a collective rite. Peyotism, like the ghost dance, emphasized social solidarity. Yet whereas the ghost dance preached the violent demise of white culture through supernatural intervention, peyotism focused on the regeneration of Native American culture through ritual and ethical behavior. I want to just pause here and note that I don't think there was anything wrong with how violent the ghost dance was, and I think that you have every right to kill people who are killing you, and every right to fight for your culture, your religion, your spirituality, the education of your children, your land, and your ability to survive. Because it's not just summed up as, are you alive? It's more complex than that. But so these authors that say, oh, well, the ghost dance was so violent, so was colonization. So I'm just saying. All right. Weston LeBar, who wrote the book The Ghost Dance and the Peyote Cult, wrote, it is interesting to note that, as with the Shawnee and others, Pawnee Peyote was early involved in the ghost dance excitement. The leader claimed from peyote the same sort of revelations acquired in the ghost dance trance, and taught that while under the influence of the peyote, one could learn the rituals belonging to bundles and societies. In this manner, he himself amassed considerable star lore. One unusual Pawnee feature was the use of a special ghost dance form of painted teepee for peyote meetings. Minor changes were made in the type of drum and rattle also. It is one possibility that in the aftermath of mass genocide, when the ghost dance proved unsuccessful, the contacts it created paved the way for peyote usage as a new cultural unifier and method of retaining some form of non-white, non-colonized religion that would not be so forcefully exterminated. Not that that has really stopped them, like the way that they're trying to now stomp out peyote usage starting in the 1960s through the 1970s, and the way the Spanish originally tried to stomp out peyote usage is still a form of genocide. It's cultural genocide, it's religious and spiritual genocide, but it's still a form of genocide. Anyway. Effects on the body. Peyote contains psychoactive alkaloids mescaline and palatine, as well as anholotine and lifotine. Bergman wrote in a 1971 report that peyote is ultra-safe, indicating that of 70,000 recorded ingestions, only one case of psychotic sequelae was ever even confirmed. Mescaline is also found in the Peruvian torch cactus, Echinopsis peruviana, also called Trichocereus peruvianus, which were used in the pre-Incan Chauvin rituals in Peru. It is also found in the Bolivian torch cactus of South America and the San Pedro cactus of South America. The long-term residual psychological and cognitive effects of mescaline, peyote's principal active ingredient, are poorly understood. Studies have found no evidence of psychological or cognitive deficits among Native Americans that use peyote regularly in religious and ceremonial context. It should be mentioned, however, that these findings may not generalize to those who repeatedly abuse the drug for recreational purposes, sans the guidance of a spiritual or religious or cultural leader, someone who's leading the ceremony. Peyote abusers may also experience flashbacks, as the alkaloids are said to trigger memory centers in the brain. Peyote's effects are similar to those of LSD, including increased body temperature and heart rate, uncoordinated movements, ataxia, profound sweating, and flushing. The active ingredient mescaline has also been associated in at least one report to fetal abnormalities. According to a study by Dr. Stara, all varieties of peyote contain approximately 0.7 milligrams of mescaline per gram of living plant. Both Lophophora diffusa and Lophophora frisi are found to be low in mescaline and high in pelletine. Potential positive effects of peyote use: feelings of insight, brightening of colors, closed and open eye visuals, mood lift, euphoria, increased giggling and laughing, increase in energy, stimulation, increased tactile sensation, dreamy feelings, feelings of hope or rejuvenation, increased access to spiritual ideation, and deep esoteric experiences. Potential neutral effects of peyote: a general change in consciousness, as with most psychoactives, loss of appetite, change in body temperature regulation, unusual thoughts and speech, unusual focus on either small details or large concepts, changes in meaning or significance of experiences, mild to extreme distractibility, changes in perception of time, changes in perception of reality, changes in self-control, unusual body sensations, facial flushing, chills, goosebumps, body energy, ego softening, pupil dilation, body tremors, urge to urinate in the early stages of experience, restlessness. Potential negative effects of peyote usage: the likelihood of negative side effects increases with higher dosage. Nausea and or vomiting, chest and neck pain in the early stages of experience, shortness of breath, uncomfortable changes in body temperature, sweating, chills, confusion, difficulty concentrating, problems with activities requiring linear focus, difficulty communicating, inhibition of sex drive, insomnia, unpleasant or frightening visions, unwanted and overwhelming feelings, depression, anxiety, paranoia, fear, and panic. Overdose. Peyote and its most common alkaloid mescaline are not addictive. Hallucinogenic substances, including mescaline, are not known to cause addiction. Peyote has not been found to cause cognitive or psychological deficits. Illicit, i.e., non-spiritual, non-religious, non-cultural use without the guide of someone who is supposed to help you through your experience safely and well. Use of mescaline is not common among Native American adolescents with known substance abuse problems. They're not going and consuming all the peyote outside of the religious, spiritual, and cultural tradition. Overdoses are possible, though rarely result from abuse of the substance due to addiction. Overdoses are generally accidental due to misunderstood dosage instructions. A peyote overdose can cause very unpleasant symptoms, including but not limited to anxiety and panic attacks, confusion, rapid heart rate, and delusions. A peyote overdose is unlikely to cause the death of the user. Peyote does not typically depress the respiratory system. It is extremely rare for peyote users to become unconscious. Most of the dangers of a peyote overdose come from the potential of self-harm and violent actions on the part of peyote users during their hallucinations. A person who has taken peyote will often have dilated pupils, a rapid heart rate, and may panic or feel paranoid. Most users of the drug will become nauseated after consumption and may throw up. Vomiting does not stop peyote's effects from occurring, although it may alleviate the user's feelings of nausea. A typical peyote trip may last anywhere from several hours to a full day. The hallucinogenic properties of the peyote are most noticeable during the first few hours of the trip. During a trip, a peyote user may be prone to seeing geometric shapes, but will usually be aware that they are the result of having taken peyote. Use of pure mescaline rather than whole peyote causes the hallucinogenic experience to occur faster, given the greater potency of mescaline. However, mescaline is often mixed with other drugs before it is sold, and in some cases, street mescaline is completely composed of other drugs, such as LSD or PCP. When this is the case, overdose may not match the symptoms of a peyote overdose in any way. Overdose on street mescaline that is not composed of peyote can be far more severe than what would be possible with peyote alone. A Poison Control Center, or EMTS, should be contacted if a peyote user shows abnormal symptoms, especially if the person loses consciousness, as this can mean that the person has taken another drug besides peyote that could be potentially lethal. Physicians who treat peyote overdose generally take a symptomatic approach. Physicians address the potentially dangerous and unpleasant effects of the drug and any drugs that were taken with the peyote, rather than attempting to purge the peyote from the system of the user. Doctors may use special treatments and tools to keep the airways open if mescaline or peyote was taken with barbiturates, as the combination can cause respiratory depression. Other drugs can be given to patients to counteract the anxiety or panic attacks that can accompany peyote use. In general, medical teams will focus on keeping the patient stable until the effects of peyote wear off. The major effects of peyote overdose generally disappear within a few hours of taking the drug. Incidence. A rough estimate of the rate of negative reactions to peyote can be made by studying the Native American Church of Navajo Land. The Native American Church of Navajo Land estimates its membership at 40,000 people. Even assuming that this is too high to be reflective of active membership and using a base of 30,000 people to reflect possible inactive membership, even assuming that this is too high to be reflective of active membership and using a base of only 30,000 people to reflect inactive membership, an estimated ingestion of once every 2 months, there would be a total of 180,000 ingestions of peyote per year. Assuming that all negative reactions reported were of pure peyote and not caused by a reaction to some other substance, that puts the rate of a bad reaction at 1 in 70,000 ingestions. The Native American Church of Navajo Land reports that the average member actually ingests up to twice a month, so the number of positive to negative reactions may be even higher. If the Native American Church of Navajo Land is accurate in its reporting, then there is one bad reaction per every 280,000 uses. This rate of negative reaction is much, much lower than is common for hallucinogenic substances. One theory on why this is, why it's so low, is that peyote is often ingested within the framework of an overarching ritual overseen by an experienced practitioner and healer, which may offset some of the expected negative reactions that would occur during an unguided trip or during a bad come down. There is someone there who's overseen tens of thousands of these journeys and who is actually guiding the experience. But beyond guiding it, which may make for a more positive experience, they are also making sure that everyone is okay, and they're very, very experienced at that. Incidents of negative reactions documented by the Native American Church of Navajo Land mention a person who drank heavily before taking peyote against the instructions of the overseers and who quit after his negative experience. Other negative reactions were from chronic schizophrenic patients who became anxious upon ingesting peyote. This would suggest that you shouldn't combine peyote with heavy alcohol usage and that certain people with certain mental health conditions should avoid peyote usage. Other negative experiences documented outside of the purview of the Native American Church of Navajo Land include a person who ingested a tea of peyote cactus buttons, which caused a case of fatal mescaline intoxication. This was associated with Mallory Weiss esophageal lacerations. The 32-year-old Native American man ingested peyote tea and after an uncertain period of time with unknown symptoms, developed respiratory distress and suddenly collapsed. He was transported to a hospital and died after unsuccessful resuscitation efforts. The autopsy demonstrated 4 separate 1-centimeter lacerations of the gastroesophageal junction, 45 milliliters of gastric luminal blood, duodenal blood, and marked pulmonary hemoaspiration. His liver had marked fatty change consistent with chronic alcoholism. An antemortem blood specimen contained a 0.48 milligram to liter of mescaline and a urine specimen of 61 milligram out of liter of mescaline when analyzed by gas chromatography and mass spectrometry. A trace amount of chlorodiazepine epoxide was also found in the blood specimen. No other drugs of abuse or ethanol were detected. Vitreous fluid, electrolyte, creatinine, urea nitrogen, and glucose concentrations were normal. The cause of death was certified as mescaline intoxication. Mescaline can produce both increases and decreases in blood pressure and heart rate, respiratory depression, and vasodilation. Mescaline is also known for its emetic effects. Other emetic substances, such as ipecac, may have caused the Mallory-Weiss lacerations, especially in those with a history of alcohol abuse. The Mallory-Weiss esophageal lacerations in this case were probably a consequence of mescaline-induced forceful vomiting. The mechanism of death was likely hemoaspiration, although an additional adverse pharmacodynamic effect of mescaline on the cardiovascular system cannot be entirely ruled out. So basically, to sum all that up, this person was a frequent vomiter, either from ipecac abuse or alcohol abuse. And combining that with mescaline, which can cause nausea and vomiting, and potentially even taking something else that could cause nausea and vomiting, this person probably aspirated on their own blood, which is not the same as taking a substance and having it kill you, which can happen with something like overdose on datura, for example. This was a complex case. But again, if you know that you have a long history of nausea and vomiting, or if you are abusing alcohol, maybe avoid taking mescaline or peyote. Persons can also be injured by improper storage of peyote. There are 3 documented cases of botulism poisoning in members of the Native American Church who consumed peyote. 13 church members ingested peyote from a communal jar during the ceremony. 2 to 4 days afterward, 3 men, aged 40, 42, and 72, noted the onset of bilateral, symmetric, moderate, and flaccid weakness in all extremities. 2 had nasal speech, dysphagia, and diplopia. 2 of the patients consented to undergo electromyographic studies, the results of which were notable for markedly diminished amplitudes of all compound muscle action potentials, which increased greatly, 40 to 82%, after exercise. This magnitude of increase has been observed in 85% of patients with botulism and indicates a presynaptic defect of the neuromuscular junction, thus supporting the clinical diagnosis of botulism poisoning. Field nurses from the Public Health Service recovered the peyote, which was found to contain type B botulinum toxin, in a bioassay in which the administration of neutralizing antibodies prevented the paralytic death of mice. Serum specimens from 2 patients were negative for the toxin, a common finding where there is a delay in testing. The stool of 1 patient contained a toxin that cannot be typed. Ingestion histories were unrevealing, and none of the freshly prepared food the patients consumed could be recovered for testing. All 3 patients recovered within the time expected for the production of new presynaptic terminals. 1 patient required hospital observation and parenteral nutrition for 14 days, then slowly recovered by 2 to 3 months. The second refused admission due to his dysphagia, but also recovered within the expected time frame. The third was only mildly affected and recovered after 4 weeks. None required antibotulinum toxin, which is reserved for patients whose condition deteriorates seriously after ingestion of botulinum toxin. The ceremonial tea the patients had drunk was made from buttons of the dried alkaline ground peyote cactus, which had been covered with water and stored in a closed jar for 2 months under refrigeration. It is likely that this prolonged and non-traditional storage of unsterilized peyote produced an anaerobic and alkaline environment that favored the growth and production of toxin from spores of the Clostridium botulinum that were probably on the cactus. These cases of botulism from peyote illustrate that all ingested substances, including herbal medicines and religious sacraments, must be considered as sources when botulism is suspected. Further, it is best to only ingest substances whose care and storage is carefully and correctly managed by experienced persons. I cannot stress enough that peyote is basically safe if you do what you should do in the first place and go to a First Nations religious ceremony that is open to outsiders, listen to what they have to say, follow their instructions, and make a generous donation afterward. Okay. Medicinal use. Peyote is used for treating fevers, joint pain, rheumatism, and paralysis. First Nations people apply peyote to the skin for treating fractures, wounds, and snakebite. Mescaline can have hormonal effects, which can increase prolactin and human growth hormone. There is increasing evidence that peyote has beneficial therapeutic uses in the treatment of drug addiction, alcoholism, depression, and anxiety. Mescaline, the primary alkaloid found in peyote, is known to modulate neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine within the brain, both of which play an essential role in the regulation of pleasure. Peyote activates the same receptor as serotonin. Serotonin affects the parts of the human brain that relate to feelings and perception. Individuals suffering from depression, anxiety, alcoholism, drug addiction, and personality disorders often have altered or injured serotonin systems. Peyote, acting as a sort of serotonin mimic, may therefore assist in the treatment of individuals who suffer from ailments where serotonin is lacking or is ineffectual. Unlike other psychedelic drugs used to treat alcohol abuse and depression, peyote doesn't appear to cause permanent brain damage. Contraindications. Potential surgery interaction. Peyote acts as a stimulant. There is a concern that peyote might interfere with surgery by increasing heart rate and blood pressure. It is recommended that users stop taking peyote for at least 2 weeks before scheduled surgery. Allergies. Peyote should be avoided in individuals with a known allergy or hypersensitivity to peyote, mescaline, or members of the family Cactaceae. Interactions with drugs. The biochemical alkaloids common in the peyote cactus are thought to be pharmacologically similar to the neuroamine-derived alkaloids found in the brain during alcohol intoxication. Caution is advised when taking peyote with alcohol. Peyote extracts may regulate blood pressure, although the clinical significance of this is currently unknown and untested. Caution is advised in patients taking drugs or other agents that may also alter blood pressure. Peyote may stimulate lymphocytes and leukocytes. Caution is advised when taking peyote with immunomodulators due to possible additive effects. Chloropromazine may affect the disposition of mescaline in fetal and maternal brains and livers. Caution is advised when taking peyote with phenothiazines. Due to peyote's hallucinogenic effects combined with other psychoactives, this may cause additive effects. Caution is advised for persons with mental health disorders who are on psychoactives. Peyote may also increase the amount of drowsiness caused by some drugs. Interactions with stimulants. Stimulant drugs speed up the nervous system. By speeding up the nervous system, stimulant medications can make a person feel jittery or speed their heart rate. Peyote might also speed up the nervous system. Taking peyote along with stimulant drugs may cause serious problems, including increased heart rate and high blood pressure. Avoid taking stimulant drugs along with peyote. Some stimulant drugs include dithylpropione, epinephrine, phentermine, and pseudoephedrine, and many others, so don't take it with Sudafed. Drugs that block the effectiveness of peyote. Chloropromazine quickly blocks the behavioral and brain effects of mescaline. Sodium amytal, a truth serum, not that there's really such a thing as a truth serum, that's a class for another day, and sodium succinate block the effects of mescaline. Sodium succinate is an antidote against mescaline psychosis. I have an entire list of drugs that increase or decrease the effects of mescaline. I'm not going to sit here and run through all of them because that would take forever. And also, y'all don't want to listen to me struggle to pronounce these. Like, that's not fun for anybody. But if you end up wanting the PDF, which I already said I would send out for free, let me know and I'll send it to you. Description. The various species of the genus Lophophora grow low to the ground, and they often form groups with numerous crowded shoots. This includes peyote. The blue-green, yellow-green, or sometimes reddish-green shoots are mostly flattened spheres with sunken shoot tips. Peyote can reach heights of 2 to 7 centimeters, between 0.79 and 2.76 inches, and diameters of 4 to 12 centimeters, between 1.6 and 4.7 inches. There are often significant vertical ribs consisting of low, rounded, or hump-like bumps. From the cusp, there is a tuft of soft, yellow or whitish, woolly hairs. Spines are absent. Flowers are pink or white to slightly yellowish, sometimes even reddish. They open during the day. Flowers are 1 to 2.4 centimeters long and reach a diameter of 1 to 2.2 centimeters. The cactus produces flowers only sporadically. These are followed by small and edible pink fruit that are 1.5 to 2 centimeters. The fruits are club-shaped to elongated. They are fleshy, bare, and more or less rosy colored. At maturity, they are brownish-white and dry. The fruits do not burst open on their own. They contain black, pear-shaped seeds that are 1 to 1.5 milliliters long and 1 millimeter wide. The top of the cactus grows above ground, also referred to as the crown, and consists of disc-shaped buttons that are cut above the roots and sometimes dried. Characteristics of peyote populations. Peyote is wide-ranging geographically, as well as variable in topographical locations, appearance, and methods of reproduction. Commonly, peyote is found growing under shrubs such as Prosopis, Laevigata, mesquite, Laurea tridentata, creosote bush, and the rosette-leafed plants such as agave, leche It also occasionally grows in the open with no protection and no shade of any kind. In some areas, such as the state of San Luis Potosi, peyote grows in silty mud flats that become temporarily shallow freshwater lakes during the rainy season. In West Texas, peyote has been found growing in crevices on steep limestone cliffs. The appearance of peyote also varies somewhat wildly, especially in the species of L. williamsii. In some cases, the plants occur as single-headed individuals, and in other cases, they become chispitose, forming dense clumps up to 2 meters across the scores of heads. Peyote populations in Texas do not seem to form clumps as often as those in the state of San Luis Potosi, but plants with several tops can arise as the result of injury by grazing animals or because of other factors. Many-headed individuals are also produced by harvesting the tops. In Texas, for example, collectors normally cut off the top of the plant, leaving a long carrot-shaped root in the ground as they're supposed to. The subterranean portion soon calluses and in a few months produce several new tops rather than just a single one like the one that has been cut off. The number of ribs present in a single head varies widely as well. The rib number and arrangement form as a factor of age, as well as a response to the environment. Rib numbers within a single genetically identical clone may vary from 4 or 5 on the very young tops up to 14 in large mature heads. On some specimens, there are bulging podaria, a small rounded projecting part or outgrowth, instead of distinct ribs. Because of the variation, it is best to have only experienced wildcrafters collect peyote. Seriously, leave it to the people who are supposed to be collecting it. You know, they know what's safe to collect, they know what's the correct plant, and it's theirs anyway. It belongs to them. Anyway. Parts used. The top of the peyote cactus, also referred to as the crown, consists of disc-shaped buttons that are cut from the roots and then dried. The buttons are generally chewed or soaked in water to produce an intoxicating infusion. However, for medicinal uses, the entire plant may be used. Dosage. Because the extract is so bitter, some individuals prefer to prepare an infusion by boiling the cacti for several hours. The bitterness is so intense that some users have reported intense nausea and vomiting just from the taste. When used for its psychoactive properties, common doses for pure mescaline range from roughly 200 to 400 milligrams, as high as 500 milligrams in very experienced users. This translates to a dose of roughly 10 to 20 grams of dried peyote buttons of average potency. However, the potency varies considerably between samples, making it difficult to measure doses accurately without first extracting the mescaline. The dose lasts approximately 12 hours. The dosage is different from mescaline, and truly accurate dosage can only be accomplished during the production of an extraction designed to isolate the mescaline. Estimating doses for fresh or dried peyote buttons can be far more difficult than simply turning them out onto a scale, as works for pure mescaline. The concentration of mescaline in fresh peyote is reportedly around 0.4% of weight, but alkaloid content can fluctuate greatly based on growing conditions, time of year, and even just from plant to plant in the same region. The mescaline content of dried buttons can reach 5 to 6% of total weight, but maybe as low as 1 to 2% or less. Arrow weed gives the following dosage for fresh and dried peyote buttons of medium size, greater than 1 inch, and then shrunk to 2.5 centimeters in diameter when dried, and the average potency. I'm pausing here to put the screen up. Ways of administration. Peyote is taken orally via a range of methods from simply chewing the buttons to complicated chemical extractions. Removing the alkaloids from the plant material greatly reduces the volume of material required to be consumed. Cultivation. Please note, several states do not prohibit the cultivation of peyote specifically, though federal law might apply. Rather, most prohibit its possession outside of a religious context. Some states now prohibit the possession of peyote, and apparently one is in violation of the law even if peyote is grown as part of a horticultural collection. Please check your local laws. Peyote is easily cultivated and is free-flowering. The seeds require hot and humid conditions to germinate. On the other hand, growers must be very patient if they wish to grow peyote from seed, even though cultivated specimens grow considerably faster, sometimes taking less than 3 years to grow from seedling to a mature flowering adult, and may take up to 5 years to obtain a plant that is 15 millimeters in diameter. In natural conditions, plants may take 4 or more years to reach dime size. At any stage, however, peyote can be readily grafted onto faster growing rootstocks, and it usually triples or quadruples the plant's rate of growth. Japanese growers, for example, have obtained peyote plants large enough to flower within a period of 12 to 18 months by grafting the young seedlings onto more robust rootstocks. The propagation of seeds requires a lot of patience. Seeds should be sown on fine washed sand and then covered with 1 to 2 millimeters, about 1/8 of an inch, of very fine sand. Cover the flat with a sheet of glass and place an incandescent light or Grolux lamp about 12 inches above the sand. These provide both heat and light. The sand must be kept moist so that young plants do not dry out as they first sprout. Germination usually occurs within 2 to 3 weeks, but growth of the seedlings is exceedingly slow. The plants should be transplanted and thinned after they are about 1 centimeter, 1/4 of an inch, in diameter. At 80 degrees Fahrenheit, seeds should sprout within 2 weeks. A few weeks after sprouting, sprouts should be given fertilizer. A regular spraying of dilute, 50% recommended strength, liquid seaweed works well. Keep the nitrogen level low and the phosphorus level high. A 5-10-5 formula is a good example. Remember to dilute the solution considerably, 25% of normal strength for seedlings. By the end of the first year, seedlings should be large enough to transfer individually to a more permanent location. This should be in separate containers or in a nicely spaced group garden. To ensure that a grower obtains fertile seed, it is advisable to outcross peyote plants by transferring with forceps some stamens containing pollen from the flower of one plant to the stamen of the flower of another. Propagation can also be accomplished by removing the small lateral tops of the Peyote specimens. The cut button or top should be allowed to callus for a week or two and then planted in moist sand or in a mixture of sand and vermiculite. It is wise to dip the freshly cut portion in sulfur to facilitate healing. Rooting is best done in late spring or in early summer. Eventually, a new root system will develop from the top. The old root will produce new heads to make a Peyote individual. Peyote is not too terribly picky about its soil. As the natural soil for peyote is primarily composed of limestone, it is important to ensure a basic pH and adequate calcium. Peyote prefers good drainage. Peyote should be watered frequently, every 4 to 7 days. In the summer, peyote prefers very little water, up to none at all, in the winter. Fertilizer should be applied when the plants are being watered during the growing season, from May through July. Peyote has few insect pests and does not need to be treated differently from other cultivated cacti and succulents with regard to pesticides. Greenhouse peyote plants sometimes develop a brown, cork-like layer that often covers most of the plant and is not natural. Its cause is not currently known. Reproduction occurs mainly by sexual means. Peyote flowers in the early summer, and the ovules, which are fertilized during that season, mature into seeds a year later. The fruit forms late in the spring or early in the summer and rapidly elongates into a pink or reddish cylindrical structure up to 1/2 inch in length. Within a few weeks, these fruits mature and their walls dry, usually turning paper thin, and then turn brownish. Later in the summer, usually as a result of wind, rain, or some other climatic factor, the fruit wall ruptures and the many small, black, pear-shaped seeds are released. The heavy summer rains then wash the seeds out of the sunken center of the plant and disperse them. Some peyote use vegetative or asexual means of reproduction. Many plants produce pups or lateral shoots which arise from the lateral areolas. After these new shoots are grown to sufficient size, they can often root and survive if broken off. If these new portions successfully grow into new plants, they are genetically identical to their parents. Surprisingly, peyote plants rarely rot, even if injured or cut, so excised pieces will safely be broken off to become independent plants. As stated previously, when harvested properly, the top of the root will form a callus and the root will not rot. When poor harvesting techniques are used, however, the entire plant dies. Harvesting peyote. Let me stress again that this plant isn't like I should not go harvest it because I don't belong to the cultures the plant belongs to. So I'm going to go ahead and record the harvesting instructions because I believe in preserving the knowledge for those it is appropriate for, but I can't go make use of it myself. So, the natural populations of peyote are in dangerous decline due to overharvesting. As a result, it is currently a threatened species. Those who wish to consume peyote are encouraged to grow their own or use alternative mescaline-containing cactus species such as San Pedro or Peruvian torch. The estimated annual harvest of individual plants or buttons exceeds millions. When properly harvested, several new heads tend to form from the old root, which generates new plants for the future. Unfortunately, plants are often cut too deeply, leaving little or no root remaining in the ground, which kills the entire plant. In addition to commercial harvesting, large sections of the peyote population in Texas are uprooted for new grazing land. The regions where peyote may be found have greatly diminished due to this. Areas where peyote once flourished in commercially harvestable quantities are now often lacking peyote entirely. When harvesting peyote, the harvester must be mindful of the fact that good technique can preserve the plant and ensure optimal chances for the regeneration of a new crown, while poor technique can damage the root and kill the entire plant. Peyote should never, ever be uprooted. Instead, the crown should be sliced off at or just below soil level with a clean, sharp knife. Some green flesh should remain with the root, leaving the plant able to sprout new crowns. It is important to make the cut at a slight angle to help slow off water that can collect from dew or rainfall and create rot. As it is allowed to dry, a hard, cork-like callus will form and that will protect the peyote. The edges will curl slightly upwards, which creates a bowl-like shape, which increases the importance of angling the cut. Done correctly, the root should survive and begin to shoot new crowns in anywhere from a couple of weeks to a couple of years. Endangered species status on private collections. Currently in South Texas, peyote grows naturally, but it has been overharvested to the point that the state has listed it as an endangered species. Private collections of the living peyote cactus are usually kept as a conservation effort or out of professional interest or obsession. Many botanists keep peyote cactuses, despite it being illegal to do so. With the endangerment of the species in Texas, those who keep the plant as a botanical curiosity and those who keep it as part of their religion could volunteer their own seedlings to repopulate the cactus, but it would be illegal for them to do so. So maybe something like, if you're in South Texas, to really kind of push for would be the repopulation of the species, which would involve decriminalizing possession of it in the first place. Religious uses. The religious use of peyote is very, very ancient. The use of peyote in spiritual ceremonies among Mexican natives was well established by the time of the European entrance into the continent. The prehistorical religious use eventually diffused and syncretized into the religions of the natives of the North American regions. Probably the most simple and possibly historically primitive form of Peyotism is the vision quest alone in nature. And please note, when I say primitive, I'm not doing the thing where I think that like First Nations people were more primitive than European people, because they weren't, and in fact they had a far more advanced civilization than the conquering Europeans. In many cases, I mean, like historically we refer to this as a primitive religion. Usually this involves fasting, solitude and quiet, and also steady contemplation. Peyote is eaten or consumed as an infusion, and a vigil is kept until such time as the communicant comes to a sense of physical and spiritual completion. This way of experiencing the personal qualities of the experience sounds very much like the traditional stories of the first person who was given peyote by Creator Spirit. Several tribes relate the story of a person who is lost in the desert. Their wandering leaves them exhausted, starving, and dehydrated. Just at the point of giving up all hope of life comes a voice that instructs them to reach out and take hold of the soft and cool plant which grows just within reach of their outstretched hands. They are then told to eat it to quench their thirst for water and food, and in order to bring guidance back to their home. The Wixaritari, also called by the exonym Huichol, tribe of the Sierra Occidental along the Pacific coast of Mexico, holds annual pilgrimages to ritually wildcraft peyote that are still a central part of tribal myth and ceremony. A group leader, or Mara Akane, leads peyote gatherers in a spiritual and physical quest to find our life. Only the peyote gathered in this ceremonial way is suitable for the spiritual use of the Wixaritari. The Kora and Raramuri, called by the exonym Tarahumara, are related native peoples of Mexico who use peyote in a religious ceremony. Kora people are known to trade for or purchase peyote from their Wixaritari neighbors, as their own traditions do not require the desert pilgrimage in order to collect the sacrament. In the mid-1800s CE, as the people of Mexico were enduring through a native genocide, the peyote religion spread north, syncretizing into the religions of other natives enduring genocide and cultural eradication at the hands of the white imperialist colonizers. The peyote ceremony syncretized into American Plains native culture as a formalized all-night prayer meeting, usually held in a teepee, hogan, or peyote house, especially set aside for that purpose. Christian elements are often simultaneously syncretized into the practice, depending on the particular tribe or group leader. Most of North American peyote spiritual practice is heavily influenced by the methods used by the Native American Church, a large group of mostly native spiritual practitioners that use peyote as their entheogenic sacrament. There are numerous branches of the Native American Church: the NAC of North America, the NAC of Navajo Land, the NAC of South Arizona, etc., with each branch also containing local chapters or moons. The leader and guide of a peyote meeting is known as the road chief or roadman, who is charged with the responsibility of overseeing the main elements of the meetings and leading others on the peyote road, the way of learning to live life well. Other officers include the cedar chief, fire chief, drum chief, and often earth mother or morning water woman. Ritualized peyote ceremonies vary some among different chapters, but many common elements are present in most Native American church ceremonies. An eagle bone whistle, feather fans, water drum, and prayer staff are a few of the ceremonial tools used to conduct the spiritual meeting. Native/non-native religious use. Peyote is traditionally a native religious sacrament and entheogen that belongs to a multitude of closed cultures that have endeavored to survive in the face of cultural genocide and colonialism. It is inappropriate for a person not of said closed culture to make use of peyote as an entheogen or sacrament without the invitation of a native person. I was invited to come and take it, and I also made a donation. Don't just go invade. We've done enough of that. Okay. Modern religious uses. Entheogens used by modern religious movements include peyote, Neo-American Church, Peyote Way Church of God, the Native American Church, and the Native American Church of Navajo Land, extracts like ayahuasca, Santo Daime, Unio de Vegetal, I know I'm mispronouncing things, I'm sorry, the semi-synthetic drug LSD, the Neo-American Church, and synthetic drugs like DPT, the Temple of the True Inner Light, and 2CB, the Sangoma. Both Santo Daime and União de Vegetal now have members in churches throughout the world. 2CB is an entheogen commonly used at public places like rave parties. Its incorporation into the religious entheogenic practices of a church is fairly unusual. The Native American church is also known as Peyotism and Peyote religion. Peyotism is a Native American religion characterized by syncretization of native traditional religion and Protestant beliefs, and by sacramental use of the entheogen peyote. The Peyote Way Church of God believes that peyote is a holy sacrament when taken according to our sacramental procedure and combined with a holistic lifestyle. Current federal law requires Native American church members to have at least 25% Native American ancestry, although some chapters have non-Native members. Most state laws also limit membership to Native Americans, although some states prohibit peyotism altogether, and a few states allow peyote to be used for bona fide religious purposes regardless of race. Of course, when I went somewhere where you could do it regardless of your race and ethnicity, as long as you were invited by a Native American member. There are about 60 chapters of Native American peyote churches with various names. The national NAC leadership is dominated by Diné or Nabiho, also called by the exonym Navajo, persons. So chapters run by other tribes sometimes do not acknowledge any affiliation beyond the local level. The Native American church has been criticized for consuming peyote that is over-harvested from its natural habitat in Texas. Although a few Native American groups quietly operate small cultivation projects, there's been a consistent failure to promote widespread cultivation using the highly productive method of grafting onto faster-growing columnar cacti, as is done in Japan. The Peyote Way Church is a sect in rural Arizona founded by Reverend Emmanuel Trujillo, Reverend Anna L. Zapf, and Rabbi Matthew S. Ken in 1978 CE. Reverend Trujillo is an Inde or Diné called by the exonym Apache native, who formerly served as a roadman for the Native American Church. The Peyote Way Church is proud to be the only peyote group that officially espouses an interracial and interfaith membership not conforming to the federal requirements of at least 25% Native American ancestry. The church has about 300 members of all races. Visitors to the church come from all walks of life. Some have been, of various religions, cultures, ethnicities, nationalities, etc. Some have been Christian, Jewish, Hindu, Muslim, Wiccan, Romani, and atheist. I want to stop here and just really note, you can go join this church and learn their ways and combine that with your other religions generally. I would not say that you can go learn their ways and then go do this yourself for other people unless you were First Nations yourself. Just because something is open if you initiate, open if you go and learn from the people, doesn't mean that it is now open for you to go share it. So I hope that I've made that clear. The clergy there maintain a lifestyle of voluntary simplicity and eschew meat, alcohol, tobacco, and junk food. Reverend Trujillo has declared that television is an instrument of the devil. The church promotes peyote cultivation as an alternative to overharvesting of wild populations. The church grows peyote in a greenhouse rather than harvesting it through wildcrafting. Rather than conducting road meetings as the Native American church does, the Peyote Way Church offers spirit walks. The spirit walk is a solitary peyote meditation performed in the wilderness after a 24-hour fast. The average amount of spirit walks the Peyote Way Church performs in a year is 40. Until recently, the church never requested financial support for any of its services. Now it asks for a $200 donation for each spirit walk, $150 for members. The Peyote Way Church owns 160 acres in the Aravaipa Valley, 50 acres more than the Vatican. The Peyote Way Church previously operated under the names the Trinity Pentecostal Church of God from 1971 to 1972 and the Church of the Holy Light from 1972 to 1977. The Church of the Native American Shaman operated in the 1990s and was based in Austin, Texas. It recognized 7 botanical sacraments. Trichocereus species, peyote, salvia divinorum, psilocybin mushrooms, seeds of the morning glory, Hawaiian wood rose, and tobacco. Due to the use of multiple entheogens rather than just peyote, the Church of the Native American Shaman was forced to disband by the government. It should be noted, however, that in the past, when churches deigned to consider religious defenses during drug prosecutions, they only listened to arguments involving a church that had one sacrament. The logic was that a sacrament is only legally valid if it is essential and indispensable for the practice of a faith. Thus, having multiple sacraments implies that no particular one is essential, despite the two species of Eucharist recognized in Catholic communion. This reasoning is diametrically opposed to the actual practices of herbal mysticism, whereby most indigenous groups use numerous plants. Native earth shrines. One method the Wixaritari natives use to honor peyote in a religious fashion is a growing altar or earth shrine. The Wixaritari people of Mexico often maintain live peyote captured in the hunt of their ancestral pilgrimage. This live peyote is venerated and esteemed and treated as a sacred altar or shrine-like space. Several Texas peyoteros, licensed peyote dealers, keep a peyote garden that acts as a form of shrine or altar for veneration by those who arrive in person to purchase their sacrament. Various members of the Native American Church have also described the cultivation of peyote as part of the sacrament and the place where it grows as sacred spaces that are venerated in and of themselves. Magical uses in non-native history. Aleister Crowley introduced his London occult students to the rites of Artemis and Eleusis, his version of them, popularizing the use of psychedelics in Europe, including peyote and mescaline-laced ceremonial symbolic magical rituals. Aleister Crowley created many rituals that involved AA members personifying and invoking deities using entheogens and then engaging in public sex acts. When the reviews covering those magical performances were leaked, many of his adherents were outed as having engaged in homosexual sex acts, causing them significant hardship. There were rumors at the time that Aleister Crowley leaked that information himself as a form of self-aggrandizement. Aleister Crowley also once dined with Aldous Huxley in Berlin, and possibly even maybe introduced Huxley to peyote. Crowley used peyote with his male lover, the poet Victor Newburgh, in 1914 CE. He and Newburgh engaged in a series of homosexual sex magic operations known as the Paris working. Newburgh and Crowley performed a series of invocations involving anal intercourse as a means of achieving gnosis. The 6-week ritual included heavy and repeated drug use. Occasionally, a Liverpudlian journalist named Walter Duranty also participated. During this period, it is possible that Aleister Crowley sexually assaulted Victor Newburgh, possibly while they were under the influence of peyote or another entheogen. There have been several that people have cited. Following the working, Newburgh distanced himself from Crowley, and Crowley supposedly cursed Newburgh. Newburgh allegedly suffered a nervous breakdown. Inspired by the results of this working, Crowley authored his treatise on sex magic, Liber Agape. I want to stress that it really bothers me that whenever I look into ritual and magical use of peyote, I find the Crowley story a lot and very little on the First Nations people to whom it actually belongs. But I thought I would include it because it is part of the history. Now, as always, all of my sources are available. You are welcome to them. And in this case, the entire booklet is available in PDF form to whoever may want it. I do ask that you do not, take the content, slap your own name on it, and start giving it out to people, or take the content, slap your own name on it, and start charging people for it. Because it's a free resource I'm providing. Because it's not my culture, I don't have any right to charge for it. So, now, of course, if you are a First Nations person, by all means, publish works on peyote. I will try to buy what you write, because it belongs to you. Anyway, please remember to like and subscribe, and maybe leave us a comment about what other herbs you'd like to have us cover in depth, whether they're entheogens, poisons, or something else in the field of herbalism or natural medicine. Let us know what content you like to see from us. You know, maybe root me on editing our old content and getting it back up. Anyway, I know this was long. Thanks for sticking through it, and I hope all of you are safe out there. Done correctly, the roots should survive. God damn it, more whiskey. I can't fucking talk. I'm almost done though.